Hey everybody, welcome back to PHP Fundamentals. My name is Jeffrey Way, and in this lesson I want to focus on namespacing just a bit. So in the last lesson we had talked about the idea that if you have a function connect, the problem with this is because it's very simple, very vague, it's very possible that another script you use, maybe it's one of your own files, or maybe it's a third-party script or plugin, they very likely also have a function called connect, and these sorts of collisions are definitely not a good thing. So we talked about some solutions, such as implementing your own form of namespacing, such as myapp db connect, and that would mean the myapp namespace within the db subnamespace, and our function is called connect. But there are better ways to do this at this point. So let's take a look at namespacing. And let's open up functions.php. And this is blank just for our example. So once again, I will create that function connect. And we're not going to have real code in here. I'm just going to return some pseudocode like that. Okay, so we have that function. Next, I have an index.php file, and I will require functions.php. And now if I echo connect, I run it. As we would expect, we do get connecting. We're all familiar with this at this point. Next, though, watch what happens when I implement namespacing. So within functions.php, or this could be your class or a specific file for related functions, we're going to add at the very top before we execute any other code. So you could add it right here, or a lot of people like to add it immediately after the opening PHP tag. It really doesn't matter, just as long as it comes before anything else. So I'm going to say this namespace, this file is going to be for functions related to my database. So I could say function app, and now app is very generic. App would be whatever the name of your application is. So maybe you have some kind of task management tool. Well, then your namespace would be tasks, or the name of the tool. In this case, I'm just going to use a general term app, but yours would be something different, and that's fine. So our namespace will be app, and I'm going to call it db. So now our root namespace is app, our sub namespace is db. Now I will save that and watch what happens when I run this again. We're going to get this fatal error, call to undefined function connect. So now we see when we implement namespacing, it sort of takes this out of the global scope. So let me illustrate this a bit differently. Think about it in terms of files. I could have, if I paste in a file right here, file.txt, but what if I have another file that also has that name? Well, now we're going to have this naming collision because you can't have two files with the exact same name in the directory. But what we could do is we could have special folders. So you could have a folder for your database. You could have another folder for your app or some other section. And then, yes, you could have file.txt within the db namespace, and another one within the app namespace. So now this same file name can exist in multiple places. And this is sort of how you can think of namespaces. db would be within the app namespace. So now we have our root directory or namespace. We can have any classes within there. Then we could have sub namespaces with additional classes or function files within there. And that's kind of the basic idea of it. It's a way to group your code so that your function names and your class names aren't colliding with what may exist in third-party plugins or tools, or even your own other scripts. So let's delete those and get back to work. If we want to reference this connect function now, what we need to do is reference the namespace. So our namespace is app/db. Now I can go app/db/connect. Now when I run it, yep, now we're getting connect. So again, I want you to remember why this is helpful is because now if we have another file that we import and it has its own connect function, that's okay. There's not going to be any collision because connect is within the db subnamespace. Now you might be thinking that the backslash is an odd choice. There's a lot of reasons behind why they went with it, and you can definitely refer to some of the discussions about it. For now, just accept it. It's not ideal, but it'll get the job done, and it'll quickly become a non-issue. But that said, this can quickly lead to some ugly code. So if I had another function like we did in the last lesson, query, return querying, well now if we want to reference that, we would also have to echo app db query, and now our code is a lot more muddy. So there are a couple ways to fix this. One, we could open up that namespace again. So I could say namespace app.db, and now we can, just like before, reference those function names like so. And that's because we've opened up that namespace again. So now we're on the same level. And if that's confusing, go back to that folder concept. You're in the app root folder, then a DB folder, and now you're on that same level, so you can access those other files, or in this case, function names. But when you don't have that, you're in the default global namespace, and it can't find those files. Okay, so that's one way. Another way is through the use keyword. So I can say use app/db, and now we are pulling in that subfolder, going along with our example from before. But if I run it again with Command R, nope, we're still going to get a fatal error. We still need to reference the sub namespace. So we would do it just like this. And now we are getting that information again. Now, one thing to be aware of is if you do something like this, because app is the global root namespace, you're not going to get any benefit out of that. The use statement with the non-compound name app has no effect. Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of how to use these, let's return to our previous example from the last lesson, organizing PDO, and let's clean this up by using namespacing. If I open up functions.php, yet we all have these very generic functions like get and query and connect. Now we're going to place those under a namespace. And our namespace will be, and let's say maybe this is a blog or something. So the namespace could be the name of the blog, or I will just call it blog. And the subnamespace will be DB, or you could call it database, or we can use aliases, as I'll show you shortly. Let's stick with blog/db. Now, if I come back and view this in the browser, we're going to get an error, undefined function connect. And again, that's because we are using a namespacing now. If I comment that out, reload it, now it's working. So now we need to upgrade our code. We have our namespacing. Now let's go into index.php. And now when we try to reference functions like this, it's not going to work. Reload, and you can see error on line 5 of index.php, which is right here. It's trying to call this connect function, but it can't find it. So I can say use blog db, and now we can reference it like so. Reload the page, and now we're getting a different issue, and this is something that confuses a lot of folks when they're first learning about namespacing. Now we have an issue in functions.php on line 11. So we'll open that back up, and now you can see it's trying to connect and create a new instance of PDO, but because we have implemented namespacing, it is assuming that we are actually trying to do something like this, blog/db/PDO. So it's trying to find this class within our DB subnamespace, but we know that PDO, it's a root class. So if I come back, we can see class blog/db/PDO. Notice where it's looking for that class. So in those cases, when you want to use a root or a global class, we're going to prefix it with a \, and that means start at the root. Reload the page. Now, we're still getting an error, but now it's on a different line number. So we would just want to update the reference in each of these locations. Reload the page, and now we're on to our next error. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this, always refer to the documentation. If we go to php.net/language.namespaces, we can scroll down, and this is the one you want, using namespaces with a fallback to a global function or constant. And notice right here, this is the main thing. If we are in a namespace, in this case A, B, C, and we try to run exception, it's going to assume that exception is within A, B, C. However, if we prefix it with a \, it's going to assume that it is a root class. All right, very good to know. So now let's fix the rest of these errors. Call to undefined function get back in index.php on line 8. And then once again, same thing here. Let's update that like so. Reload the page, and now we're getting the exact same thing, but now this is a smarter way to go about structuring our code. When we take advantage of namespacing, we don't have to worry about these global generic function names, or we don't have to worry about creating very specific function names that nobody could possibly remember, like that. We just use namespacing, and now we're done. Now, if I come back to index.php, I had mentioned the idea of using aliases. So let's say that your class is something that isn't quite readable. Well, you could always say use blog/db as database, like that. Now if I come back, we're going to get this new error because we are now aliasing that reference as database. So we would want to update it in both locations. Reload the page, and now it's working again. However, in this case, try to make your classes readable, of course. I usually find that I can stick with the default name that I went with, like that. There we go. So namespacing can definitely be a little bit confusing at first, so go over this lesson again if you need to, and if you have any questions, just visit the tutsplus.com forums, and we'll be glad to help. My name's Jeffrey Way, and I'll see you in the next video.